This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. I am dressed for the occasion. Apparently, my co-host Jack doesn't care about that. He's styling and profiling in Florida. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, and I am joined by Jack Hirsch, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, who I believe is styling and profiling in Florida. And Jack, I'm jealous. You have your fan on and I don't have mine on.
Yeah, but listen, this weekend, this Sunday, when I'm going to the Dolphin Packet game on Christmas Day, it's going to be the coldest Christmas day in the last 27 years in Florida. So, I'm getting a little taste of the East Coast still.
Jack, that ought to be a good game because the Dolphins need the game.
Well, yeah. Let's see what happens. I'm going to be rooting for the Pack, being a Jet fan, assuming the Jets beat the Jacksonville Jaguars Thursday. And if the Dolphins lose to the Packers, it moves the Jets into a tie with the Dolphins for playoff spots. So, you know what my loyalty is. It's always
Jack. I like how it's set up where all the teams are meeting. The Dolphins and the Jets are going to have to play again. They're within a game of each other, and the Jets have the game in hand because they beat them head to head. So we have some good football to look forward to. We're going to talk some boxing.
Matchups and boxing. Everyone is avoiding one another. Everyone is accusing the other guy of ducking them.
That's the world we live in, Jack, according to boxing. And before we get to the meat, I'm going to say this. There's a guy on this station named Pags. I think he's ducking me, Jack. So I need you and Mac to be the facilitator so Pags and I can get it together. And I'll show him how dangerous it can be to underestimate an old man.
Well, Pags is the Philly sports guy who's a regular on the Mac and Jack show. He's really big around Philadelphia circles. He's the ultimate Philly fan. And I guess he's gotten to you, too. The way
Jack, I love Pags. I hate his teams. Okay, anybody but the Eagles, Raiders, or Ohio State.
I didn't know you did.
All right, Jack. So let's
go. We're talking football here.
That's all right, Jack. Boxing and football go hand in hand. Your buddy Bill Parcells is a huge boxing fan, and so is Phil Simms.
Right, and
so a lot of football fans love boxing.
And I'm going to be doing a story hopefully next month. It's basically arranged. He agreed to it with Ed Too Tall Jones. Remember the former Dallas Cowboy defensive end, had 6 fights as a pro.
6-0, right.
His abbreviated boxing career.
He fought Yaki Menezes in his first fight and got knocked down with a slap.
I don't think that was his first fight, if I'm not mistaken.
Yaki Menezes, I think, was his first fight.
Was? Okay, well, I'll have to look that up. But regardless, 6 fights, retired, went back to football.
And, Jack, when he went back to football, he was a better player, and he even said that because he said the training for boxing actually got him in better shape.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Jack, before we get to the meat of the show, let's get the sad news out of the way. Longtime referee Steve Smoger passed. I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but he was ill. I don't know what he had. I hadn't talked to him for a couple years. I was friends with Steve. He was a municipal court judge down the shore in South Jersey. He ran his court just like he ran the ring, Jack. No mess or nothing. Steve and I we traded emails. We would talk on the phone. Whenever I called him, he got back to me promptly. We had some great conversations. He tried to get me into judging and refereeing at one point, and I forget what was going on with my life and my career, but it just didn't work out. But Steve was one of the good guys. he will be missed. And I feel bad. My heart goes out to his family. Thoughts and prayers to them. But Steve was a good guy, and I know you have some stories about him too.
Yeah. Steve was a first-rate referee. He really was. He understood when to stop a fight. I'm going to give you an example. He was the referee in the first fight between Vernon Forrest and Shane Mosley. Mosley, early in the fight, suffered 2 very heavy knockdowns.
Second round.
Steve watched them carefully, let the fight continue, and it went the distance. I mean, Forrest won, but he gave Mosley a very reasonable opportunity, understanding the knockdowns were early in the fight. Mosley wasn't in the danger zone like fighters or late in the fight. And as soon as the fight was over, he said to me, because we had talked about it before, he leaned over the ropes and said, I wouldn't have stopped the Costa Zusap Judah fight because that was an equilibrium punch. He understood the difference between when a fighter is really hurt and seriously in danger, or when his equilibrium is off. Because when the equilibrium is off, the fighter can regroup. It's a question of him regrouping. Maybe the fighter needs just to go down for a moment, take one knee, and then he regroups, or gets in a clinch, and then he regroups. So he understood that. He understood when to stop a fight, when not to stop a fight. He looked out for the fighters. He didn't let fights go on too long where fighters could get seriously hurt, but he didn't panic. To the public, they see a fighter's legs wobble, and immediately the public thinks, stop the fight. He can't defend himself because his legs are wobbling a little bit. If that were the case, they would have stopped the Ali Frazier fight in the 11th round when Ali's legs were wobbling a little bit. Okay, some referees would have done it, but Steve Smoger knew where to draw the line. A really excellent referee.
He loved boxing, Jack. He ate, slept, and drank it. And as I said, he was a municipal court judge. And Jack, he was one of those guys. In fact, he actually got in a little bit of trouble because of this. But if court started at 9 o'clock, don't show up at 9:01 because he did not let guys in, and he would hold you in contempt. He was a no-nonsense guy in and out of the ring. You always knew where he stood. I agree with your assessment of him as a referee. I think he's one of the best, and he was a nice guy. And,
He loved boxing, Frank. If he knew you were a big boxing fan and you were a minute late, he might conveniently look at his watch and say, oh, maybe I'm a minute off, let him in. He's a big boxing fan. That's
Jack, can I tell you something? I don't think so. Knowing him, I don't think so.
Here, but
I would have never tested him on that.
Yeah,
all right, so Steve Smoger, hats off. Job well done. Rest in peace, sir. We'll see you on the other side. Jack, let's talk about 2 fights that happened this past week. One we didn't get a chance to really discuss before the fight because it happened on Tuesday. But Naoya Inoue, he unified the 118-pound title, the bantamweight title. A lot of people think he's the best fighter pound for pound. It was a great showing. He's going to move up and fight at junior feather at 122 or super bantam, whatever you call it. Naoya is the real deal. Can punch, can box, can put them together. I don't think that was his greatest showing, Jack. I think he knew he had Paul Butler, whenever he could get him, and eventually he got him. But he's had an unbelievable run. I believe he's like 17-0 with 15 knockouts in title fights. He's only 29 years old, and I think we're going to be seeing him in some big fights in 2023.
Well, Inoue is a super bantamweight, 122 pounds. He is a murderous puncher for his division. I mean, when
Jack, he's moving up to 122.
Yeah, well, he's but
yeah, because he had to weigh in twice for this last fight at 117.
Right. He's going to be fighting at 122. That's where he is for now on. I mean, that was his last fight at 118. Right. But against Paul Butler, I mean, he stalked Butler all fight, and he was very patient. Like he knew he'd eventually get Butler before the final bell. And Butler fought a safety first fight, which he should have done. People criticized Paul Butler, but what was he going to do? Was he going to go into Inouye's wheelhouse and attack him? I mean, so that his only hope of winning the fight, Paul Butler, would be to move away. And you never know. There's always the tiniest of possibilities. Inoue could run out of gas and Butler can come on and stop him in the late round.
He had to get lucky. Basically, Inoue had to beat himself.
Right, basically. But when you feel Inouye's power, how can people criticize Paul Butler? Eventually, he got knocked out. And, he did what he could do in there. And I didn't like the criticism that Paul Butler took because he was moving around the ring. I mean, some people considered running. He was in a survival mood. Let's be honest about it. He wasn't.
Jack, he was. But what a lot of people don't understand or they don't want to understand is boxing is using your legs too. I get so tired of hearing when people say Ray Leonard ran from Hagler. No, he used his legs and made Hagler chase him, and he set him up that way. Using your legs is defensive. It can be offensive. Ali's defense in the 60s was all his legs, and he didn't run. Movement and footwork are all part of boxing. That was about the only tool that Butler had. But, Jack, you know this from the boxing you've done. If you can't hurt me, it's a long night because you can't make me do anything I don't want to do. And when you know I can hurt you, it's like that affects your gameness and the way you engage. And that was a typical fight where you had the church mouse against the house cat. And Inoue was the house cat. There was never a doubt about it from the first minute on. Inoue is the real deal. And, there's a lot of people arguing about, well, who's the best fighter pound for pound? I happen to think it's Terrence Crawford. But if somebody says it's Inoue, I'm going to give them some resistance, but I'm not going to die on that hill because Inoue's that good.
Speaking of Crawford, there's a controversy that came out that his gloves were tampered with, and Everlast takes responsibility because something about the glove, it malfunctioned that Crawford had on. And
right.
Everlast said Crawford had nothing to do with it, no knowledge of it. He just wore their gloves. So there's no evidence of the slightest hanky-panky on Crawford's part. I couldn't imagine for the life of me Crawford having his gloves getting doctored. So let's exonerate Crawford completely, unless we hear something new.
Jack, if that happened with Inoue, you know what they would be saying? He hit so hard that he shattered the glove or it ripped apart. I don't buy it. I think it was a fluke thing. It had no effect on the outcome of the fight. Should they have changed them? They probably should have, but they didn't. But I don't think it had any effect on the outcome of the fight. And we both know since the Panama Lewis fiasco, those gloves are inspected damn well good before the fight. There's no shenanigans there. That was just a freak thing.
Panama Lewis was in Roberto Duran's corner for the first Sugar Ray Leonard fight. And afterwards, Leonard said Duran's punches felt like bricks.
That's why it was called Hands of Stone.
It kind of makes you think. Well, it was called Hands of Stone before that. But it kind of makes you think a little bit.
I think the Risto fight, the Panama Lewis fiasco, Jack, is the Risto Billy Collins fight, and obviously the Bottle Eye mix with Aguayo. But I don't think there's any of that in play here.
I can't imagine someone taking anything in the bottle and it working immediately, that moment. It's not like Popeye taking spinach, Frank. Remember Popeye taking spinach and that next moment he would, overpower Bluto or whatever. You see, I remember about the cartoons, Frank. It's been decades, but I still remember. But so there's nothing in the bottle, but you tamper with the gloves. That's a potentially serious
That's dangerous.
Matter, but,
Jack, a lot of people don't realize that they think because there's gloves on that it doesn't hurt. And they think MMA is more dangerous because of the difference in the gloves, where they have done tests where they've had boxers throw punches with the MMA gloves, which in boxing we call them bag gloves, and the 8-ounce boxing gloves. And they said the boxing glove was actually harder because of the weight. And people don't understand, when you hit somebody in the face where all the bones are, you can easily hurt your hand. So when you have a guy who has his hands wrapped where it's like a brick, and then you fool around with the padding, you are taking somebody's life in your hands. And remember what Billy Collins said during the fight with Risto. His dad said, son, this guy's not much of a puncher. Why are you going after him? He said, Dad, it feels like he's hit me with rocks. Then we find out after the fight, Panama Lewis, Mickey the padding.
Frank, as we're getting to the new year, I think the big talk in boxing isn't the big fights that are being made. It's the big fights that aren't being made. I mean, so many fights that should be made. For example, like Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk. We don't know whether that's going to come off or not. It's 50-50.
Right.
Now Fury's talking about fighting Anthony Joshua. Fury is saying he'll fight him for nothing, nonsense, utter nonsense, on Fury's part. But the bottom line is Fury might not be fighting Usyk next. Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, I don't think they're ever going to fight.
Well, Jack, say why? Because Errol Spence was in a car accident the night of the Crawford fight, and now he says he has aches and pains.
Frank, they should have fought. They should have fought before that accident. The fight was
absolutely.
And there was.
Remember, I predicted it was wrong.
And it wasn't going to be. And it wasn't. It wasn't going to take place in the spring, regardless of Spence's accident. And we wish Errol Spence well in a speedy recovery. There better be. He should be fighting Dimitri Bivol. He's fighting Anthony Yarde. Come on, please. And after he fights Yarde, you're not going to get Bivol better beef. I don't think, it's not going to be easy to make because Bivol is promoted by Eddie Hearn and Better Beef is promoted by Bob Arum, and they don't get along.
I hate that we have to talk about that, but you're right.
Well, you know what? Let me tell you, someone is going to have to take a stand. And I think it's the fighters. I think if the fighters let the promoter know, you have to match me with so-and-so. This is what I want. I'm not fighting for a while. Or let the fighter go public against his promoter. Saying, look, you speak to my promoter. This is the guy I want to fight. He's not letting me fight so-and-so. And they can figure things out. For example, Bivol and Better Beef, I say it's a 50-50 fight, a purse split. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Fury, Usyk, I really think that's 50-50 because Usyk is the legal champion. But Usyk would be willing to take a little less than 50-50, I think, to make it happen.
Because he wants to fight, right.
And for all of Fury's talk about fighting for nothing, I don't want to hear money's holding up a Usyk fight. If he's going to talk about fighting Anthony Joshua for nothing. Spence Crawford was willing to take a little less from from what I understood. But that was, for whatever reason, that's a fiasco that took place. But we have one fight that I think might actually happen. When I first heard about it, I didn't think it was going to happen. I'm still a little skeptical. Frank. I feel it's
Davis and Garcia?
I feel it's 70-30 it's going to happen. Okay? But I still have some doubt. I mean, because you have Golden Boy with Garcia. We haven't heard the purse split yet. We have Tank. He split for Mayweather. Does Mayweather have papers on him to still be his promoter? How come we haven't heard a purse split? Oscar De La Hoya, the promoter of Garcia, says we did everything to make this fight happen. What did they do? What are they getting? We normally know what the purse split is, Frank.
Jack, I agree. Isn't it a shame, though, that we are at the point where it's easier to accept that the fight isn't going to happen than that it is. And I think your 70-30 is probably a pretty good gauge. I wouldn't bet a whole lot of money on it happening. Would I be more surprised? I have to say this, Jack. I'd be more surprised if it happened than if it didn't. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that it happens. As far as Fury, I take nothing that he says to heart because whatever he said today can be different tomorrow. I know that Usyk is very willing, and he will not be the reason that the fight is held up. If it's held up for any reason, it'll probably be Tyson Fury. As far as Spence and Crawford, look, as hard as it is for me to admit this, I said back in, I think I said it after one of Boots' fights that because of his emergence, he's going to force Crawford and Spence to fight in 2022. You refuted me on that. And look, you were right. I was wrong. The fight didn't happen. I gave them more credit. You didn't think it would happen. It didn't happen. I'm not going to pick a side on whose fault I blame Crawford or Spence. I know you think it's Spence. I'm not in the room with them negotiating, so I don't know. I just know this much. We all lose because it's not happening. And based on Spence's car accident and what he said this week that he might not be fighting anybody until May or June, that just pushes it back further.
But could I tell you, Frank, if the elite guys, the two top guys, aren't going to fight one another, fight the next best guy. That'll be good enough for me. I'll give you an example. Crawford or Spence, let him fight Boots Ennis, and I'm happy. I'm just as happy, as nearly as happy as if they fought one another, okay? Tyson Fury, Usyk, let either guy fight Joe Joyce, and I'm happy. Especially Fury and Joyce. That's kind of intriguing with Joyce.
We have this. You're right, Jack. That's what makes this sport go. The best fighting the best.
I'm nearly as happy, and what gets me to the way they're promoting these potential fights. Now, Ryan Garcia had a tune-up fight. Tank Davis has a tune-up fight all set before they meet. Tank is going through with this fight January 7th, okay, in Washington, D.C., around his home, near his hometown. And Garcia pulls out of his fight late in January, thinking he doesn't need it. Now, if you want to promote it the right way and get everyone excited, put them on the same show. Those warm-up fights to fight one another, they both win, and you're building towards something massive.
Jack, do you know how hard that would be? The negotiations it would take, who's going to fight the main event, who's the semi-main event, that would be impossible to do. But I can see having them fight close to each other so we have a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. I don't think Garcia not fighting is a big deal as long as him and Tank meet next. And I agree with Joe Bergman. The fight we had this weekend was a good example of two young guys with Frank Martin and Michael Rivera fighting at lightweight. Two guys that entered the fight undefeated. They took it early in their career. Rivera lost. He lost completely. Frank Davis is definitely a player down the road. I think Rivera will have his day. Neither guy was hurt, but we had what was a one-sided fight because Frank Martin really, dominated the fight. But Rivera's not done. But there are two guys that we should applaud, as Joe said, for taking a fight at this stage in their careers.
I think Rivera was the type of prospect who he was like a throwaway type prospect. Frank Martin has the potential to be elite. He's part of the Errol Spence camp. He's trained by Derek James. He has the potential to join the elite guys. And maybe 1 year from now, when we're talking about the Ryan Garcias, the Tank Davises, we're going to be talking about the Frank Martins. He might be joining.
I think he's a budding star, Jack. I definitely agree.
But Rivera, based on what I saw at the Barclays Center, he was in the 6th rounder, and he was touted. And I saw him box. He didn't look good at all. And it just didn't seem he was quite on Martin's level. But he was highly touted. He was unbeaten. And it was a good matchup. Sometimes you have a certain matchups like Daniel Dubois and Joe Joyce when they fought, about a year and a half ago or whatever. That was a great matchup.
And Dubois was the A-side going in.
Right. Well, Frank Warren promoted them both. and Du Bois was his guy, and he seemed to be even disappointed that Joe Joyce won, despite Joe Joyce's Olympic background. Silver medalist got robbed out of the gold.
Right. But Jack, it's just such a crime that I saw something, I forget where it was, and they posted how many fights that the elite guys had in the last 24 months. And I think Jamal Charlo was 1. Crawford was 3. Spence was 2. And I think Canelo had 4. And we're just not used to that. And I guess it's just the money. We're never going to see guys fight 70 or 80 times like we did with James Toney. And he's one of the more recent throwbacks that had that many fights. We're not going to see that anymore, Jack. It's just a different game today.
I'm sick of Canelo. He's fighting John Ryder this spring. For all of Canelo,
is that official?
It's all but. Okay, and chances are it's going to be in England, so it'll be a big event there and all.
We'll make a ton of money
promoting Canelo. Yeah, he'll make a lot. Canelo will make money with anyone. But for all of Canelo's big talk, I want to fight this guy, I want to fight that guy. He's talking about a Bivol rematch. Then he says he beat Bivol. He doesn't have to fight him again because he really beat him. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Canelo is going, Jack, I think from this point on, we're going to really see Canelo take the Mayweather strategy, and he's going to fight guys he knows he can beat. But let's give credit to Jamel Charlo fighting Tim Tszyu next month. Jamel is a unified champion. Tszyu is a top contender. Contrasting styles. I think that fight's January 24th. That'll be a big fight. It's one that we disagree on. I love Charlo in that fight. I know you like Tszyu.
No. I'm actually picking Charlo, but I give.
Oh, then you've changed, Jack. You've changed.
I like Charlo. He's making me more and more of a believer. Okay, little quicker, but Tszyu is going to be bringing it. Tszyu is going to be bringing the heat,
and that plays right into Charlo's hands.
It could, but if Charlo doesn't dispose of Tszyu early, and I don't think he will,
then he'll outbox him.
He's going to be in for a very long, tough night. And I think that's what's going to happen. But I think Charlo's overall skills, and he can go a hard 12 rounds if he has to, will be enough to hold off Tszyu in a terrific type fight. I think a fight of the year candidate. I really do.
Jack, did you see that Jamel actually said he should be higher in the pound for pound debate? Now, I'm not crazy about the pound for pound debate because it's too subjective, but I think he has a good case. He's cleaned out 154.
Yeah, all right.
What's that?
One of his fights, he fought a draw. Jamel Charlo.
No, he lost.
No, that was
he has one loss, Jack.
One loss. No, I'm not talking about that loss early. That was a few years ago. Then he fought a draw, and he avenged it in the rematch. I'm having a brain freeze, the opponent. Maybe one of our listeners could help us.
I'm going to look it up real quick, Jack, because I think this is important. And here we go. No, he has one loss, Jack, and that was to Tony Harrison, who he knocked down the rematch.
He had a draw later on.
He drew it. Yeah, he drew it Brian Castano and then knocked him out.
Right, Castano.
Okay.
Castano's name. He snapped Castano in the rematch. Now, Jamel Charlo has a good point, but when you talk about being, let's say, a top 5 pound for pound, you look at the other guys, Crawford, Spence, they don't quite have that little blemish there. And a lot of people feel, Charlo was a little fortunate to get that draw, but he did set the record straight in the rematch where he was superb.
But Jack, Charlo has beat the best in the division. He's a fighter who has a killer instinct. He has good fundamentals. He can box. He can punch. He has a good chin. He has stamina. I think he has a very solid case based on who he has fought, how he has performed in those fights. I think that he has a solid case to be in the top 10. And I'm a very big Terrence Crawford fan. And if Crawford moved up to fight Jermell Charlo, I'd pick Jermell.
Yeah, the pound for pound thing is so hypothetical. I mean, you have Canelo hanging around. Do you honor someone for career achievement in pound for pound listings, or do you judge them for what they are now? Because I'm going to tell you what Canelo is right now. He's not a top 5 pound for pound fighter at the moment. But if you want to consider his body of work, career achievement, sure, you could put him there. Lomachenko's not a top 10 pound for pound fighter at this moment. But if you want to look at how he was before his body of work, yeah, you could put him there.
If he were to beat Devin Haney, though, that would put him back in the mix. I don't think he will, but if he did. But to me, Jack, the pound for pound, there's 2 ways to look at it. You can go by resume and how good the fighter is. Now, the way I see it, Usyk, maybe Inouye have a slightly better resume than Crawford, but I think Crawford's is better than people think. But I just think that if they were all the same size, I think Crawford has more layers to his game, and I think he's the better fighter. That's how I break it down. Just like when it comes to Hall of Famers, I saw a couple guys this week that came at me and said, Bradley's a Hall of Famer, Timothy Bradley, because they mentioned, they mentioned some names that he beat. Look, I don't see it. The best guy he fought, he lost 3 times. Beating Marquez and old Marquez at welterweight doesn't show me a lot. But everybody looks at it different. I know you consider fame a big part of it because it's called the Hall of Fame. That's why Ingemar Johansson scoring a big win over Patterson, well, that pretty much is his fame to claim. So I can understand that, but I just look at it different.
I'm not out of getting Machin too. So, Machin went the distance peak listed. Okay, so he has 2 signature wins, but I just don't think Ingemar is a Hall of Fame fighter. When I think of Hall of Fame, Jack, to me, it means the best of the best. Buster Douglas had one of the biggest wins ever. He's not a Hall of Famer. No, I understand what you're saying, Frank. It's certainly not a slam dunk with Johansson. I could see your argument. But the bar is lower now. I'm hanging out a couple of years ago, the year before the pandemic, in Canastota on the Hall of Fame grounds. I'm hanging out with Ron Borges. We're sitting, we're talking, and Ron Borges says, in his opinion, Mike Tyson isn't a Hall of Famer, shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And, I mean, how do you argue that? But he starts pointing out Tyson's wins, Larry Holmes was over the hill, this and that, trying to break it down in a way, that Tyson lost to this guy, that guy, and all. But just in the amount of fame that Tyson had in itself goes a long way. Because, you stop someone on the street now and you ask them to name a famous boxer, chances are they're going to name 2 people, Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson, even still, today.
Jack, here's where I agree with Ron to a degree, but here's where I part. I agree with him in that if you look at Tyson's career, he's more known for the losses. He lost to Lewis, he lost to Holyfield twice, and he lost as the biggest favorite maybe in heavyweight history. So I can see that part. However, when I look at Mike Tyson in his prime, I think he is one of the top 5 most skilled heavyweights I have ever seen, and I would have a hard time picking 10 past heavyweight greats who beat Mike Tyson at his best. I can think of a couple guys who didn't win the title that might be a problem for him, but men that actually won the heavyweight title, that were the unified champion. I'm not sure there's 10 of them. So if we go by fame, which you like, and the ability as a fighter that I like, I think Tyson is clearly a first ballot Hall of Famer.
This is a good lead-in, Frank. I think to our fantasy fights. I want to be sure we give it enough time because I saw some of the matchups that you posted.
Okay.
And they're pretty good. So I'm raring to go whenever you're ready to start, unless you have something else to say.
I have one that I didn't post. Let's start off with that one. Frank the Wrecking Machine Lotierzo against James Paggs, Mr. Philly.
Well, tell Russell Peltz, who's going to be there promoting that. He's going to be promoting you and the Philly sports guy. Tell him the fight doesn't take place unless he agrees to Zach Clayton being the referee. Zach Clayton has to referee that fight.
That's the only way it happens?
That's the only way it happens. Zach Clayton refereeing. Ray Mancini.
What do you got? Paul Merrick. You haven't written in for a while. Ray Mancini, one of my favorites, really shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Paul, I agree with you. I love Ray Mancini. Not a Hall of Famer.
But he was famous. He was
famous, Jack. So see, there's that delineation. That line, is it fame or how good you were? How great of a fighter that you were? Mancini was a rough and tumble guy that wasn't that skilled, but he beat you with conditioning and determination, but he's not a Hall of Famer. But other than Sugar Ray Leonard, he was the most popular fighter at the time.
Yeah.
All right, Jack. Paul, thanks for your thoughts. All right, number one, lightweights. Benny Leonard versus Carlos Ortiz.
You know, interesting fight. Carlos Ortiz, I spoke to him, once about, his opponents, doing a story on him. And he made it clear to me, he liked guys who came to him, guys who moved away from him. He hated fighting. They gave him
problems. Benny Leonard was a boxer.
He agreed to me. He would have had a heck of a lot of difficulty with Pernell Whitaker. Obviously, he would have had a lot of difficulty with Roberto Duran, hands of stone, obviously. But style-wise, he told me he'd rather fight a Roberto Duran because he knows Duran is coming to him. Whitaker's slippery, hard to catch. And he mentioned that even with Ken Buchanan, Ortiz's last fight, he was all washed up, retired on the stool. He said, part of the problem that night, I got tired. I was old. I was past my prime. But Buchanan was a boxer. He moved away, and those guys gave him problems. And that's what Benny Leonard was. I think Benny Leonard's overall slickness, ability to move in and out, it's going to give Ortiz a lot of problems. And it'll be a real tactical match. But Leonard wins it 9-6, 10-5.
Okay, Jack, I agree with the outcome. I think Leonard was just too versatile for Ortiz. He hit harder than people thought. He beat better opposition. Leonard can do, from what I've seen and read, he could do everything in the ring, but based on his opposition, Benny Leonard has to be the favorite. I'm not sure he knocks Ortiz out, but I think he wins a clear-cut decision with not really many close calls. I'll go with you, 10-5, 9-6, maybe 11.
I got maybe funny. Yeah. Ray Arcel.
Go ahead.
He who trained Roberto Duran during Duran's, reign as lightweight champion, and for both Leonard fights. Arcel told me he also worked with Benny Leonard. Benny Leonard was the greatest fighter he ever saw.
I've heard him say that, even greater than Duran.
Better than Duran at his peak, and he kind of was apologetic in a way. Well, Leonard could do it. He didn't say straight out Leonard was better because Duran was his guy too. He said, but Leonard could thank you. He could do this. He could do things that no one else could do. So
there's one thing, Jack, we can't argue, and I don't mean you and me. I just mean period. I have Roberto Duran as the greatest lightweight ever. But there's no doubt in my mind that Benny Leonard fought better opposition at 135 than Duran did. And a lot of Duran's mystique, let's face it, when he showed he could go up to 147 and beat a great guy like Sugar Ray Leonard, that makes it pretty hard to envision lightweights outboxing him. They could live with him for a while. They could run for 7 or 8 rounds, but he would get to them eventually. But Leonard has a style to give him trouble, and he clearly fought better opposition than Duran did because they were around.
But I'll tell you, Duran, too, even though he was dominant at lightweight, opponents did give him some trouble. Edwin Virouette went the distance twice in the non-title.
Both Virouette brothers gave him a little bit of a run.
But they would win rounds here and there against Duran, even though Duran hated their guts. I mean, against Edwin Virouette, the fight was in Philly for the second fight for the title.
I was at the fight, Jack. It was a 15-round fight. I watched Duran train that week.
You remember how you scored it, Frank? I remember.
I don't remember, Jack, but I remember thinking I had there was no doubt in my mind that Duran won the fight. But because Virouette did better than people thought, they made it closer than it was.
No, it was about 11 rounds to 4, but the point
I thought Virouette basically ran and fought to survive.
Yeah, to an extent. But Ray Lampkin, he did, before he got stopped in the 14th round, he actually won a few rounds. Okay, you could argue he won 3-4 rounds. And you compare this to a Roy Jones who totally shut opponents out. They wouldn't win a round against him.
But Roy's level of opposition, Jack, was really limited. He didn't come up in a great light heavyweight era. I mean, look, he beat Hopkins 8 out of 12 rounds, but Hopkins was the only elite guy he fought, and Hopkins won more rounds against him than anybody else did in all his combined fights. And as far as Duran, because he was a swarmer, Jack, some of those guys take a little time to get warmed up, to close the distance, to get inside, slip the jab. So I could see why guys could live with Duran for a few rounds before he tracks him down and beats him down. I mean, Villamar Fernandez gave him a good run too, and he beat Arguello. It's like Duran, if you didn't engage with him and you moved away, you can live with him for a few rounds because Duran was more of a technician than people think, and he wouldn't come out of his shell that much and go crazy trying to knock you out like other attackers would. He had a sophistication to his style. Everything he did had a purpose, and he knew eventually he could get to you. And the longer his reign at light heavyweight went, you saw guys want the distance with him more because they started to fight to survive more than beat him.
Okay. No argument.
All right, Jack. Number 2. This one will be easy. We'll get this out of the way. George Foreman, 73-74 versus George Foreman, 90-91. So George Foreman, who fought Frazier, Joe Roman, Ken Norton, Muhammad Ali, against George Foreman, in between beating Jerry Cooney and giving Holyfield a tough fight.
I don't think it's that easy. It used to be very easy. It used to be ridiculously easy. I don't think it's that easy anymore, Frank.
To pick a winner?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go with the young George Foreman. Simply put, the older George Foreman barely got by Alex Stewart, barely got by Lou Savarese on points.
That wasn't him at his best, though, Jack. That's 97. I'm talking about the guy that knocked out Cooney and gave Holyfield the toughest fight of his career at that time, and who Holyfield said hit him harder than Lennox Lewis or Mike Tyson.
That second coming of George Foreman would have to tire out the first coming of George Foreman. But take the Foreman of both Frazier fights. That was a very disciplined George Foreman, very disciplined. Don't tell me he couldn't have gone a hard 15 rounds in Kingston, Jamaica, if he had to, by some chance. He was in great shape. He could have gone.
But Jack, what was the consistent in that fight? The first fight, Frazier took it to Foreman, and he got annihilated. In the second fight, he tried to box him, and Frazier can't fight going backwards. I think young George Foreman would annihilate old George Foreman. Think about this. Did you ever see young Foreman back up? No. Did you ever see old Foreman back up? No. So what's going to happen? They're going to meet at center ring. So as much as George Foreman, old Foreman, may want to fight reserved and pick his spots, young Foreman is not going to let him do that. Young Foreman hits harder, he's faster, he has better reflexes, and he would force old George Foreman back, something that no other fighter ever did. I don't think this is much of a contest. I think 73-74 Foreman stops old Foreman, 90-91 Foreman.
George Foreman had two careers. There's a young George Foreman and an old George Foreman.
Right.
You know the old George Foreman never got knocked down? The
Never.
young George Foreman was floored by Ali, Ron Lyle twice, and Jimmy Young. But old George Foreman wasn't knocked down. And old George Foreman was in with punches too. Evander Holyfield teed off on old George Foreman. He hit him with the kitchen sink, and he couldn't bring him down. And Holyfield was a good puncher, let's say, okay? Not devastating, but a good puncher.
But Jack, Foreman
hard.
Morrison ran, and you talk about Foreman being down his first career. The only guy that hurt him was Ron Lyle. He passed out against Muhammad Ali and Jimmy Young because he emptied the wagon. And Jimmy Young, he had Gil Clancy training him then, and Gil Clancy made him a wait and react counterpuncher, which is not who Foreman was. Against Ron Lyle, he waited to start that fight. Got started late, but because he hit so hard and took such a good shot, he had a tough time and was dropped twice. But Lyle was the only guy that hurt George Foreman in the 1970s, where Ali, he had to wear himself out before Ali could knock him out, Jack. Ali hit Foreman harder in the 5th round than he did in the 8th round, but it didn't make as much of an impact because Foreman was more gassed. I just think it's a bad style matchup. Young George gets there first with more, quicker, and don't anybody try to tell me that old Foreman hit as hard as young Foreman, because that's preposterous, as Mike Tyson would say. No way. The style matchup favors young Foreman, because, Jack, neither version can fight backing up. Young Foreman is going to force old Foreman back. I don't know if he drops him, but he will be hammering him so bad on the ropes, they'll have to stop the fight.
I couldn't imagine an older version beating a younger version of any two fighters, okay? And the young version of Kingston, Jamaica, I just can't see him losing to an older version, even though it's not the absolute slam dunk you're making it out to be.
Jack, I think it's a slam dunk. I do. And I actually believe, and I really believe, the night that Ali beat Foreman in Zaire, I'm not sure, as much as I love Joe Louis, Jack, I'm not sure any other heavyweight in history could have defeated that Foreman. I'm not sure Ali could have done it again if they fought a year later.
You forget something. Young George Foreman had stamina problems big time. He would get tired.
What? Only against Ali?
Against Gregorio Peralta.
He had 15. Jack, he had 15 fights then. He was a year out of the amateurs. Peralta had 80 fights at that time.
But the idea, he was out of gas in the 10th round there. Okay?
Okay, Jack, he had 15 fights.
Against Jimmy Young, he ran out of gas at the end. Old George Foreman paced himself better, was smarter, more poised.
Jack, old George Foreman could never hold off young George Foreman. And George Foreman, who fought Jimmy Young, is not the same George Foreman who fought Frazier, Ali, and Norton. Foreman, who fought Jimmy Young, was a guy that had damaged confidence and had a trainer that instilled in his mind that maybe you have to pace yourself. And we saw what happened. Foreman didn't start punching on Jimmy Young until the 7th round, almost knocked him out. Young survived. Foreman was a little gassed. And remember, that fight was in Puerto Rico outside Foreman didn't get there till the day before the fight. Young had been there 10 days before the fight, and that's not prime George Foreman. I'm talking prime George Foreman, the best, the one that was 40-0, 37 knockouts, who did not believe he could lose to any human being on the planet. So I think that version of Foreman wipes out the old version of Foreman. I think it's a fugazi that people think old George was smarter. Old George fought slow, Jack, and measured for one reason, because he was too old and too slow and didn't have the energy to go out and get his guys like he did earlier in his career.
And next week, we'll talk about young Muhammad Ali against the second version. But what's our next fight?
That's a good one, Jack. That's a good one. I didn't think about that. I like that surprise. Okay. Our next one is one of my favorites, and it's a very tough one. I want to hear what you think. Sonny Liston against Lennox Lewis.
You know, it's funny. I mean, I talked with Emmanuel Stewart about it once. Lennox Lewis was his guy, so he had to be partial towards Lennox Lewis. He told me Ali and Lennox Lewis would be a nip and tuck fight, but he said
he said they're the two greatest, right?
Yeah, he thought Lennox Lewis would beat Liston, of course, but Lewis was his guy once again. Conversely, Angelo Dundee told me when he was alive, Ali was the only heavyweight that could have beaten Liston. Okay, so you get differing viewpoints. I kind of lean towards Lennox Lewis in that fight because Lennox Lewis was so physically strong. He was George Foreman type strong, Lennox Lewis. You couldn't push Lennox Lewis around. I mean, and Liston's...
Jack, Evander Holyfield pushed him back. Zelko Maravich pushed him back.
No, Holyfield didn't push him back. I mean,
Jack, in the rematch, when Holyfield had an interest in the outcome, if you watch, Lennox Lewis fought with his back facing the ropes and moved most of the fight, where Holyfield was the attacker and bringing the fight.
Boxing, Frank. It's called boxing. When Holyfield starts unleashing combinations, unless you don't stand there and absorb them or try to...
Lennox Lewis, I'm sorry, Holyfield does not hit as hard as Liston, doesn't have the jab, and he's not as physically strong.
Look at Vitaly Klitschko, how strong Vitaly Klitschko is, okay? He took it right to Lennox Lewis. It was a battle of attrition. You know, Klitschko was a late sub. He'd been training for someone else, and Lewis maybe wasn't in the best shape himself, but it was a battle.
No, he was riding off the Tyson win.
Right, two strong guys, butting heads, and there was so much. I kind of feel Lewis, who can box well if he has to, move around the ring if he has to, could get in great shape when he wanted to, would be able to hold Liston off. He would be clinching his good share of the time, grabbing onto Sonny, okay? And Lewis, also keep in mind, he went toe-to-toe with a guy like Ray Mercer, so he could get down in the trenches. Mercer's no Sonny Liston. Granted, he doesn't have the punch that Liston has. He doesn't have the jab Liston has, but he does have the physical toughness, Ray Mercer.
But if he can't apply it, Jack, what good is it? He may be as tough, but you just said he can't jab as good, and he doesn't punch as hard.
Hey, tell Tommy Morrison he doesn't punch too hard. I mean, you know, Ray Mercer could be tough. I like Lennox Lewis to hold off Sonny Liston. Early rounds are tough. Believe it or not, I think it could go to a decision. I think he would hold him off, maybe for a clinch a lot, score, grab, sloppy type fight. I think Sonny would slow down as the rounds went on. He wouldn't just walk through.
So you like Lewis?
I like Lewis on points, actually. Believe it or not, it's hard to fathom a fight like that ending on points. But that would be my...
All right, Jack, I like Liston. Some people are going to say Lewis has a size, but Liston actually had the longer reach. I believe Liston was just as strong or stronger, so I think the size is nullified. I think Sonny had the better chin. I think Lewis had confidence problems. Would have a confidence problem against Liston I just don't think that Lewis did anything better than Liston. I think Liston's actually a better boxer, and if Holyfield could back Lewis up. Now, Lewis is a rare guy who's a puncher who can fight backing up, but I think if Liston can back him up, he can get the better of him. Lewis was knocked out by McCall and Rockman. Not great guys, but they did beat him. Liston had those wars with Cleveland Williams. Neither guy has a speed advantage. I just think that Sonny was harder and stronger. I think he would stop Lennox. Here's my only trepidation. Lewis clearly beat better opposition, but I really never saw anybody outfight Sonny Liston. We don't even know the truth about his age. I don't think we ever really saw him in his prime as champ. I would give Liston the edge. I think he wins. Do I have a big problem with you going with Lewis? No, I do not. It's a fight I thought about for a long time. I think they're both two of the best boxer punchers in heavyweight history, but I just think Sonny was just the tougher, harder guy. And if Lewis couldn't boss or muscle Holyfield, I don't think he could do that with Liston. So I would take Liston to win by a mid to late round stoppage because I think they would trade. But I will say this. Lewis's best punch, his right hand, is a punch that Liston could be hit with. So that's something to keep in mind. But I would give the edge to Liston, but it's not like, it's not an automatic call to me.
Okay.
All right, Jack. I hate this one. And I'm going to make a pick, but I hate it because they're both two of my favorite fighters. So I'm going to let you go first. Rocky Marciano against Smoking Joe Frazier.
Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not popular to pick against Marciano, but I like Frazier in the fight. I think Rocky would be it's a race. Let's say it's a race to get to the finish line. Joe would just be a quicker starter. Rocky was methodical. He'd wear guys down. Little by little wear him down. I mean, in Frazier, he'd be a slow starter the first round, then get going. But I just think Frazier's punch accumulation, his busyness, they meet head on. Marciano cut. Frazier didn't really cut. And I think Marciano would be hittable for Frazier. I just like Joe Frazier in that fight. I mean, I know it's going to make a lot of Marciano fans upset, but look, I'm entitled to my opinion. I kind of feel he would cut Rocky at some point. I think Rocky might work his way into the fight and have some very good moments, but he'd get hit enough times where the cuts would open up to the point where it would get stopped mid to later rounds, probably mid rounds.
Jack, this is a tough one for me. I know you read my Facebook page, and Monty Cox on my Facebook page, I think summed it up pretty good. He likes Marciano's right hand over Frazier's hook. However, he believes, and we've had this conversation countless times, I don't believe that Marciano would ever get the victory that Frazier did over Ali. I think Frazier's a tougher fight for Ali than Marciano because Frazier put on more bell-to-bell pressure. I think he cut the ring off a little better, and I think he was a little harder to hit. With Marciano and Frazier, to me, this comes down to who's going to force the other one back. Neither guy can force is good going backwards. Joe Frazier pushed the fight against George Foreman the first time. Nothing would deter him. Marciano doesn't hit as hard as Foreman. The two biggest punchers that Marciano fought, Walcott and Archie Moore, both dropped him. I think Frazier would have defeated everybody that Marciano did. I don't think Marciano would have defeated Ali and given him life and death 2 other times. I love them both. I can see the case for either guy. So when I'm forced to make a pick, this is how I make the pick. Marciano of the first Walcott fight versus Frazier of the first Ali fight. I got to give the edge to Smokin' Joe. I think he's a little quicker. I think he might be able to force Rocky to back up. What a fight it would be. Slight edge to Frazier. Either he wins by cuts or a decision, but Rocky would be in the fight and dangerous until the last bell and is capable of stopping Joe. But my pick is Frazier.
Fair enough. Okay, we ran out of time, but just a quick note. Ali said that Marciano is greater than Frazier, but he was a friend of Marciano's, but he admired him as a fighter, Ali. But on that note, we run out of time, Frank. So
all right, Jack, we'll have a happy Hanukkah, a Merry Christmas.
I won't be here next week, Frank, so you'll have
I'm going to have a surprise co-host.
Okay.
Any other final thoughts, Jack?
No, that's it. Rocky Marciano, one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time. Still,
okay, Jack, and I hope you leave the Miami Dolphins Green Bay Packer game upset because I hope the Dolphins win. Have fun.
Okay. Take care.
Merry Christmas.